Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. It's Meathead Monday, where I take a video from before my meaty head was on camera and redo it with my meaty head on camera. Today, I'm looking at another of Alan Parr's videos. In this one, he explains why he thinks millennials are leaving the church and offers some suggestions about how the church can get them back. Well, I'm not sure yet what the suggestions will be, but for me, the main thing that will have the best chance of getting me back is for the church to actually be teaching true things. So maybe they could work on that? Well, let's see how Alan plans on wrangling me back into the fold.
Recently, I put a post out on my Instagram and on my YouTube channel asking the question, why are so many millennials leaving the church? And some of the responses that I got were very, very interesting.
I mean, with the look on your face, I'm kind of half expecting the responses to be sexual things that you've always wanted to do but aren't allowed to, and are so living vicariously through those who have left the church. Well, Alan, I have a suggestion for you. Leave the church yourself and let your freak flag fly. It's a much better, more satisfying, happier, and healthier life.
According to a recent poll, nearly 75% of baby boomers consider themselves Christians, but only around 50% of millennials would claim to be Christian.
Good. That's a trend in the right direction. And the none category is growing, at least in the United States. Worldwide, Islam is on track to be the dominant religion by 2050, but we're just talking about the United States here, so let's ignore that until I inevitably have to shift the focus of my channel to Muslim apologetics.
Roughly 2/3 of all millennials attend church only a few times a year or less. 4 out of 10 millennials say they seldom, if ever, go. So the question we have to ask ourselves is why? Why are so many millennials leaving the church?
Well, according to a Pew Research survey on why some of the nuns have left religion, the number one reason given, coming in at 49% of respondents, was that they no longer believe. Which is actually a little bit weird to me. Like, yeah, I'd expect that to be the number one reason, but I feel like if you still believe, then you wouldn't be in the none category. But hey, people are weird, and none is just a general category for anyone that doesn't identify with any particular religion, rather than people who actively reject religion, so I guess it does kind of track.
But the bigger question that I want to address in this video is what can we do as a church to hopefully win them back?
To have your message be a true message seems to be the number one thing that would get almost half of them back, so just convince them that it's true. Or alternatively, another article from Pew found that in the few areas where young adults are more religious than older generations, there was a pattern of peace during the older generation's younger years, and widespread violence leading to civilian deaths during the young adults' lifetimes. So, if you are exposed to violent conflicts in your formative years, you are more likely to be religious as an adult. Now, this is just me speculating here, but I feel like this phenomenon could account for the much higher levels of religiosity that we see throughout history. For a lot of human history, war and violence were a not uncommon part of pretty much everybody's lives. And religion is a coping mechanism. Who dies in a war is pretty random, so if I behave right and pray right, maybe a higher power will protect me. And then survivorship bias confirms this hypothesis. I survived, and I prayed that I would survive, so God must have been looking out for me. Well, what about those that didn't survive? Well, maybe they didn't pray, or if they did, maybe they prayed wrong or to the wrong god or something. So violence reinforces religious belief, and religion does have a history of spreading through violence. I am not saying religion is the cause of all the world's violence, nor am I saying that religious people are all violent people, but statistically speaking, religion and violence do seem to be inextricably linked.
Okay, so the first claim that many millennials will say about the church in terms of why they don't go is that the church is intolerant.
That is certainly a reason why some would choose to leave a specific church, but I don't think that would be the cause of someone just stopping attending church in general, unless they just can't find a more tolerant church in their location. Because that was one of the semi-big reasons for being a nun as well. They're just too busy to attend. Although, at this point, it might be helpful to split the nuns into some of their subcategories. A predictable 0% of self-identified atheists said that they didn't go to church because they're too busy, as opposed to 14% of the nothing in particular people. And again, if we're looking at this split, 82% of atheists stopped going to church because they don't believe, and 63% of agnostics. But I suppose if we're being honest with the data, then the atheists and agnostics only make up about 37% of the nuns, and only 37% of the nothing in particular nuns said that they don't believe. So unfortunately, Alan might actually be addressing the more common concerns, which seem to be rather superficial if I'm honest. Like, they are genuine problems that churches have, but the main question in whether or not you attend should be whether or not you believe, I would think. So, if anything, this data shows that we still have a long way to go when it comes to teaching healthy skepticism and critical thinking skills.
Or another word they may use is church people are judgmental.
Yep. Despite the admonition in the Bible to judge not lest ye be judged, and that whole vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord thing, which is supposed to be saying that you don't get to punish people for sins, that's God's job, churchgoers still insist on being judgmental towards what they consider to be in the wrong, even though all sins are supposedly equal and everybody's a sinner, so under that view, no matter what your sin is, you are just as bad as everyone else. Did you wear mixed fabrics? That's just as bad as the gay couple being gay, so as long as you're enjoying your cotton polyester blend, you can't claim to be better than them. And actually, this is a point that I would agree on. Being gay is just as bad as wearing mixed fabrics. That is to say, it's not bad at all, even though it is condemned by the Bible.
According to the Pew Research Center, 57% of all millennials believe that the church is too judgmental as compared to only 37% of baby boomers.
Yeah, because your biases tend to become entrenched in you when you are young. That's where the trope of racist old people comes from. The idea that they spent their formative years in a more racist time and are now too old to change. While I don't believe that they are too old to change their views, I do recognize that it is harder for older people, and so it does make sense that the older people, who are largely the ones running the churches, don't find them to be as judgmental as younger people, because the churches line up with their biases. And obviously, there is a danger of overgeneralizing here. I am not saying that old people are all a bunch of homophobic racists. In fact, the numbers are rather encouraging. Yes, older people tend to be less accepting of homosexuality, but in the United States, that acceptance is at an all-time high, with 64% of people over 50 agreeing that homosexuality should be accepted by society.
So two things are happening here. The first thing is that you may feel like the church is too judgmental or intolerant because the church is promoting and preaching things that are going against what you want to do with your life, and you don't like how that feels.
Or alternatively, now that we have an unprecedented amount of access to real data from the real world, we've been able to figure out that the main harm that comes from breaking a lot of these rules that the church is setting down is found in how the church members treat the people who break the rules, rather than in these actions being just inherently harmful. Turns out a lot of them are not, and the church is not willing to change with the times, so it's getting left behind. I mean, I'm sure it'll change eventually. Most churches are still catching up with 19th century morality, so when it starts hurting their bottom line more, they'll start changing their tune in the hopes of winning people back, but not before then.
You don't like the church telling you that you can't shack up, or that you can't have sex before marriage, or that you can't smoke weed, or you can't do all these different types of things. And so as a result, your natural knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, the church is intolerant.
It's not just that it's intolerant, it's that a lot of those things are not actually harmful things, and some of them are even beneficial. And pressuring people to avoid them can be harmful. Not allowing sex before marriage causes people to get married younger, because the sex drive is an incredibly powerful thing for most people. And when it comes to life decisions, would you ever suggest making a decision that is guaranteed to have a significant impact on the rest of your life, completely blind without knowing exactly what that impact will be? How do you know if living with someone is desirable without first living with them? You don't know what habits they have that don't show up when you're both together outside the home that you might find intolerable. Would you buy a car without test driving it first? And a car will have a much smaller impact on your life than who you are living with. So if you wouldn't buy a car without a test drive, why would you agree to spend the rest of your life living with a person that you have no experience living with? And the same people who would encourage you to never live with anyone until you marry them will also tell you that divorce isn't an option. Once you're married, that's it. It's final. Of course, the church doesn't actually have the legal ability to stop people from divorcing, so it happens anyway, and following church guidelines increases your chances of marrying young so that you can do the sex, but people who get married young are significantly more likely to end up divorced than those who wait until they are over 25. And as to recreational drug use, marijuana is basically the least harmful drug you could possibly have chosen as an example. Yeah, the medicinal claims are mostly bullshit, but ultimately, marijuana is less harmful than alcohol, and the Bible definitely approves of drinking, at least in moderation, while it never explicitly condemns other drug use. On top of that, taking actions that are less judgmental, for instance, decriminalizing drug possession and use and instituting supervised injection sites for safe recreational drug use, have positive impacts on society, with fewer overdose deaths, fewer disease transmissions from dirty needles like hepatitis and HIV, and overall lower drug use. These effects come about not just due to government policy, but also in how the population views drug use. Stigmatizing it and being judgmental about it like the church wants to do makes things worse. So when the church is pushing a moral code that is demonstrably harmful, then the church needs to come to grips with the fact that they are not working in people's best interests and change. But of course, God is perfect, so even when God's policies are objectively harmful, they must actually be good somehow. It can't be that the church is wrong, all the data has to be wrong.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
You don't like the fact that the church is saying that same-sex marriages are a sin and all these things. And so because you might be struggling with some of these things, you are naturally saying that the church is intolerant and the church is judgmental.
Yes, and your language surrounding these issues is reinforcing that. You refer to people struggling with same-sex attraction as though it's something that is to be fought against, when in reality, it's none of your goddamn business who people are attracted to, and there's no good reason to try and force people to conform to your narrow view on sexuality. But yeah, the book that thinks genetics are determined by what sticks you're looking at while having sex also thinks that gay stuff is icky. Therefore, we must live our lives in accordance with this book.
So that's the first thing that might be happening, is because you're looking at yourself and you're saying, hey, the church is now infringing upon my freedom to do what I want to do, and I don't want to feel guilty about it.
It's more that the church tries to make people feel guilty for things that they have no control over, and which should not be a source of guilt in the first place. It's weaponized guilt. Make people feel guilty when they sin, and they have to come back to us for absolution. So make sure that things that are natural, normal, harmless, and often irresistible biological urges are labeled as sinful, so that it's pretty much guaranteed that everyone will struggle with them and need to come back to us. It's more than a little gross.
But the second thing that you may say about the church is that it's intolerant because of how it views other people.
Yeah, there's that too. I have had more than my fair share of Christians telling me all the things that they know about me based on nothing more than the fact that I use the word atheist to describe myself. They know that I'm mad at God, that someone hurt me and I'm redirecting that hurt at God for allowing it to happen, that I just want to sin, etc., etc. Do you think all these people coming at me insisting that they know me better than I know myself are going to make me feel like the church is willing to tolerate my existence? Or do you think it comes across more as the church trying to explain away why people like me can never exist in the first place in an attempt to sweep me under the rug where Christians won't be exposed to me or my ideas? And how likely do you think I am to want to go to a place where these intolerant people with mistaken ideas about my motivations will all be gathered together?
You may say, okay, well, hey, the church says that these people can't live an alternative lifestyle or whatever. So here's the thing you have to be careful about, Mr. or Miss Millennial, is the fact that you can't blame the church for simply promoting or presenting, if you will, a biblical approach to what's going on in the world.
Yes, you absolutely can. Because every church, every denomination, every individual Christian ignores huge swaths of scripture in order to promote the version of the religion that they personally prefer, and each one is claiming to be adhering to the real biblical teaching. The antebellum slave owners were, as they thought, living biblically because the Bible endorses slavery and commands slaves to obey their masters, commands Christian masters to not threaten their slaves. It doesn't say to release them, just don't threaten them. And this is Ephesians chapter 6. This is New Testament stuff. You, Alan, don't approve of slavery and claim that the Bible does not endorse it, and you call that a biblical view, even though you had to blatantly edit the Bible in order to get to that view. Well, it is very easy to disagree and say that the biblical view includes rules that permit slave ownership. In fact, it's easier to disagree because in pointing out that the Bible does permit and endorse slave ownership, I don't have to remove parts of verses like Alan did in his video trying to argue otherwise.
The church is merely a conduit between God and man.
Which church? There are thousands of different denominations that all teach conflicting things about God, and many would actually disagree with your assessment that the church is a conduit between God and man, instead going for the "it's not a religion, it's a relationship" thing.
The church merely presents, or is a mailman, if you will, where they're presenting what God has already spoken. So you can't get mad at the church. If you want to say somebody's intolerant or judgmental, you need to point the finger at God, because God is the one who said these things are not good and these things are.
And yet, whenever I make a video explaining why the God of the Bible is an immoral monster, I inevitably get a handful of comments from Christians telling me that I have no right to judge God. How dare I presume to call God immoral? Don't I know that God is the source of morality?
We live in this crazy, demonic, insane day where people judge God.
So, yeah, to answer this, I'd agree. If the God of the Bible exists, he is an immoral monster that doesn't deserve to be worshipped, and so I won't support an organization dedicated to worshiping him. Add on to that the fact that this God apparently does not exist, and that leaves us with a bunch of immoral organizations attempting to impose their immorality not only onto their followers, but onto everyone living in the society with them.
So, is this a valid claim that the church is intolerant?
Yes. By your own admission, the church is intolerant because it uses intolerant documents as its foundation.
I would say that's probably not valid.
Which is actually kind of weird, since you agreed that it was intolerant, but just shifted the blame. Don't blame me, blame God. Which is actually a really gross position to hold when you think about it. Since God doesn't exist, he becomes your shield. I'm not a bad person for believing these bad things. It's God's fault. Except there are churches that are available to you that do not believe those bad things. They find a way to make it work with the Bible, and you choose to go to the intolerant church. Why? Because you agree with what it teaches. You are intolerant and using God as an excuse for your intolerance.
The second major claim against the church is that the church is not authentic.
I mean, they keep preaching about helping those in need and then having scandals surrounding them where they abuse those who are in need. So yeah, I can see that.
And what I believe they're saying here is that, you know what? Hey, I would just love to see some people in the church that are really real and really vulnerable and transparent with really what's going on in their life, because they walk around as if they have these perfect lives, these perfect marriages, and these perfect children, but underneath the surface, their lives are not really that.
I actually don't think that's what that means, because it's actually a trope of sermons that the pastor, when preaching against a specific sin, will admit that they themselves have struggled with that. They aren't perfect, they still struggle with it. I think it's more the practice what you preach thing. Like, for instance, the Catholic Church once fired a priest for having gay orgies with consenting adults. Had the priest's partners been children, though, he wouldn't have been fired. He would have been moved to a community that was unaware of the abuse, possibly one without an extradition treaty if there were authorities involved, sometimes even promoted in the process. So, when people see stuff like that, the message that it sends is that being gay with consenting adults is worse to the church than abusing children. They have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to legal consensual activities, but as soon as it becomes an illegal and non-consenting activity, we have to act with forgiveness and compassion for the perpetrators of these heinous crimes. And yes, the Catholic Church is the easy target for these kinds of examples, but it is by no means exclusive to them.
And so a lot of millennials are saying, hey, we would love to see church members or leaders share a little bit more about their real struggles and what's really going on in their life, because we can't relate to perfect people.
Yeah, like I said, church leaders sharing their struggles with sin from the pulpit is a trope at this point. So no, I don't think that's what that means. Not for most, anyway. I don't know. This one's kind of subjective, so I may be wrong on the interpretation, but this is how I see it.
So is this a valid reason for why millennials may not want to be in church?
Yes, but not because church leaders aren't willing to admit the sins that they preach against, but because church leaders are regularly found abusing their positions of authority.
I would probably say, yeah, that's pretty valid, because a lot of church people try to front and act like they have everything going on. But the third reason why I believe that many millennials are not wanting to go to church, and many of them have confirmed this, is that they just believe that the church is filled with hypocritical people.
Is that not literally just the same point as the last one?
People that say one thing and do something else. Now, what I will say to a millennial on this one is that this, I believe, comes from an unrealistic expectation about what church people are supposed to be about.
Yeah, how dare we expect preachers to actually practice what they preach?
If you go to church and you're expecting everybody there to have it all together or to be perfect or to not be hypocritical any more than the people at your job or anywhere else that you go in the world, I think you're setting yourself up for an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, the thing with that, though, is that if I found out that the company I worked for was receiving charitable contributions, which the people giving them were expecting to be going to doing good works in their community, but they were instead using that money to protect their higher level employees that have been caught engaging in illegal and immoral activity, I would leave that company and make as much noise about it as I could. Why does the church feel like they can be held to a lower standard than a secular organization while at the same time preaching what they see as a higher standard?
So that now when you peel back the layers of these people's lives and you see that they're struggling with different things, then now you're like, okay, well, I don't want to be a part of this because these people are hypocritical. What's interesting is that you don't quit your job if your job is filled with hypocritical people.
Yeah, but most jobs have nothing to do with what you do in your personal life. If someone at work says that porn is bad but watches porn anyway, that has zero impact on their ability to do construction or whatever job you want to use as an example. But if your job is to literally preach about the evils of porn, but it turns out you use it just as frequently as everybody else does, then that is directly related to that job. The equivalent here is not looking at how people behave in their personal lives, but in their professional lives. If a construction worker is not in the habit of building things according to the local codes, but says that they are, that is a serious problem that could, and probably should, cost them their job. If an accountant fudges the numbers in their books, but says that they didn't, that is a problem that should cost them their job. These are examples of professional hypocrisy, and when the hypocrisy is relevant to the job they are doing, the appropriate course of action is often termination, and sometimes may be subject to criminal investigations and charges. But for some reason, religious leaders aren't held to the same high standards.
So is this a valid reason to not go to church because the church is filled with hypocritical people? No, I don't believe it is.
Well, you'd be wrong then, especially since this is essentially the same as the previous point that you made, which you then said was valid.
Because if they are hypocritical, that's where they need to be anyway.
Nah, try evidence-based therapy before you try religion. It's got a much better track record.
Now, another claim that millennials may make as it relates to why they don't want to go to church or what's wrong with the church today is that the church is just not relevant to their daily lives.
Well, as long as the church is tying itself to the Bible, it really isn't. The Bible is a fascinating look into ancient history, but it is not a guidebook for how to live your life, despite what people like Alan will claim. And this is demonstrated by the fact that people like Alan feel the need to remove verses from context and then chop them up to eliminate the distasteful bits in order to even make the claim that the Bible does not condone immoral things that the Bible clearly does condone. Just do the same thing with the gay verses, Alan. It's not that hard. There are fewer verses in the Bible condemning homosexuality than there are verses allowing slavery, and somehow you came to the conclusion that the Bible does not allow slavery. Just apply that same motivated reasoning to the issues that culture has come to accept that you still think the Bible condemns, and you'll be all set. I'll even start you off in the right direction. Linked in my description is a paper published in the Journal of Bible and Culture, which explains how all of the passages that Christians use to condemn homosexuality weren't actually about homosexuality. And the arguments against the idea that the Bible condemns homosexuality actually have better grounds than the ones arguing that biblical slavery wasn't really slavery. Which brings me to another point. If there really were an all-powerful God out there and he wants to send us a message, do you really think he would do it through a method that is so subject to interpretation that you can make it say anything you want it to?
Now, while some aspects of church should be relevant, what we have to be careful about here is that we need to understand that the Bible is not a self-help book.
Well, fucking men to that.
Right? And so whenever the preachers may preach from something like poetry or a genre like prophecy or narratives or history or proverbs or all these different types of things. Listen, should the preachers just not preach from any of these parts of the Bible because after all, prophecy is not relevant or some of the Old Testament history books are not relevant to where you are?
I mean, yeah. Why would I waste my time listening to a sermon that is entirely irrelevant to my life? Who cares about the genre? Relevant does not equal self-help.
The Bible is not a self-help book, right? So you have to understand that the whole purpose of the church is not to just make everything and every sermon relevant to your life. It's to give you what they know you need in order to grow spiritually, even though it may not be completely relevant to your life.
So basically, Yeah, it's irrelevant. Go listen anyway. I just can't wait until he gets to the part where he explains how to win millennials back to the church, given his poor understanding of the concepts he's presenting. Should be interesting.
So is this claim valid? I guess you could say it's valid only from the perspective that I don't think that the church or the Bible was intended to always be perfectly relevant to your life.
That is actually a really weird admission from a Christian. Usually, it'll be taught that the Bible is universally relevant. You can find stuff in the Bible that is relevant to any situation, and God will often speak through preachers by putting a message on their hearts that will be relevant to the lives of those who need to hear it. So I guess that's all off the table?
Now, the next claim that many millennials will make is that the church is not concerned with culture.
No, the way you have it written on screen is a better way of saying it. The church is detached from culture. Yes, obviously the church is concerned with culture. That's why it's trying so hard to hamstring cultural progress. Because cultural progress chips away at the church's control of culture. But it is detached from culture, seemingly oblivious to significant changes in the culture until years and sometimes decades after they happen.
They are detached from culture because one of the things that many millennials will say is that, they want to see change going on in the culture. They want to see our society change. They're proponents of racial equality and social justice and some of these other things that are going on in the world.
And you're not? You don't want racial equality and social justice?
And they look at the church and they're like, you guys are preaching sermons from Zechariah and Malachi or whatever, and the world is going in this direction, and you are the church, and you don't even care.
Yeah, the church is stuck in the past. It gets dragged along with the culture eventually, kicking and screaming. It always succumbs to cultural pressure in the end, but it never leads the charge in things like equality or justice. And yeah, the excuse for this is that if God were real and the Bible is actually his message, then you would expect that message to withstand the test of time. But unfortunately for you, it doesn't. And then the church looks at culture and makes proclamations about the depravity among the youth nowadays, and then they wonder why the youth don't come to church anymore. Well, this cultural lagging is just more evidence that it's not true. God could have just said, hey, gay people are fine, there's nothing wrong with that, no need to treat them any differently than you would treat straight people. But instead, he said to stone them to death, their blood is on their own heads. And then these proclamations lead to the suffering of the people that aren't choosing their sexuality, and given the social pressure, would have preferred to choose not to be gay. This leaves us wondering, why is the all-powerful creator of the universe so very concerned with what we do with our genitals? Isn't that a rather petty thing for God to get hung up on? Are there no more important concerns that he could have brought up in his book?
So is this a valid claim? Well, let me just first of all say this, that the church's ultimate overall mission is to impact people's lives eternally.
Yes, but when you can't do anything to demonstrate that we actually do get an eternal existence, then the unwillingness to change with the times comes across as you guys being an outdated organization using fictional carrots and sticks to attempt to control people.
And not just temporarily on this earth. So the main focus, the main priority of the church is not to accomplish some sort of social justice that's going on in the world.
Why, yes, I had noticed that the church seems completely unconcerned with accomplishing real-world justice things.
It's to make sure that people's eternal lives and their eternal state, right, is going to be with the Father.
Yeah, well, Jesus didn't say that gay people couldn't go to heaven, so if you're truly worried about people's eternal souls, shouldn't you work to change the church to actually care about the causes that you see as being the causes that are causing millennials to stop going to church? That was a lot of causes. I tried to work another one in, but I couldn't. Wouldn't that be a better way to win souls than to alienate those that you are supposedly trying to help? The greatest commandment is to love God. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments, at least according to Jesus. That's not some of the law and the prophets, it is all of the law and the prophets. So it doesn't hang on preaching against sex outside of marriage or against LGBTQ rights or any of that stuff. It's on love. When you choose to make it about these other things, you are implicitly admitting that you care more about these non-issues than about the words of the man that you think was God in the flesh.
So we need to be careful about expecting the church to do something or be something that even God may not have ever intended them to be.
According to your own book, God said that the entire law and prophets are summed up by the commands to love God and love your neighbor. So if it's anything that's not love, it's not what God intended it to be. Well, I mean, he also once ended a parable with a command to bring my enemies and slaughter them before me. And yeah, that's a parable, so it is easy to interpret as not meaning exactly what it says. But it was a parable where the guy giving that command was an analogy for God, so it's also really easy to take it as meaning exactly what it says. So yeah, once again, we come up against the problem that the Bible can mean anything to anybody. So really, when you get certain things out of it, that says more about you than it does about the Bible.
Now, I have a whole other video where I talk about whether or not the church should be involved in issues of justice.
Given your history, you probably come out on the wrong side at the end of that, but what I would say is yes, they should. In a positive way, not in the way it's currently involved, where it's trying desperately to drag everything down. And actually, I decided to go look at that video. Surprisingly, he comes out on the side of churches joining the fight against injustice. So, I guess he's pro-LGBTQ rights? Right? No, of course he isn't. He made a video about how to deal with a child coming out as LGBTQ, and opened it by essentially saying that being gay is the worst possible thing that a child can do to their parent, which will crush all of their hopes and dreams.
When everything that you thought that they would be now comes crashing down. Let me first say that if you are watching this video and you are dealing with that level of disappointment or pain or heartache, because your child has come out, or you're starting to see signs that maybe they're having issues in this area.
That is fucking gross, Alan.
And then the last claim that many millennials will make is that, you know what? The church is not really adding any major value to my life. Like,
yeah, it teaches hateful and harmful things, and none of it appears to be based on any truth. So I would say that that is true.
And the reality is that that's a valid claim. You don't, right? So you don't need to go to church for any of these things.
Any of these things refers to the list of things that I skipped that you can get without going to church, like a fulfilling career, a loving family, etc. Basically, all of the most important things in life.
But going to church, the bride of Christ, is what helps you grow closer to God.
Except God does not appear to exist, especially not the Christian God, so I can get all of the most important things in life without the church, and the only function the church serves is to enhance your relationship with the God that doesn't actually exist. So, yeah, I think I'll continue sleeping in on Sundays.
So now we've addressed whether these claims from millennials are valid or not. So now I want to switch gears, and I want to talk to the church. What is it that we can do as church leaders to hopefully win this millennial generation back?
You could convince God to actually start existing and stop being so regressive. Those are probably the two biggest things you could do right there.
And now the first thing that I would say is that we as a church need to be more inclusive. And what I mean here is that far too often you have too many churches that are making all of these major decisions about what is happening in the church, and they seldom, if ever, include other younger millennials in those decisions. And so as a result, many millennials don't feel like the church is for them.
Sure, that's actually decent advice for the church. I doubt it'll happen anytime soon, on account of the whole millennials are more progressive than the older generations thing. But yeah, if we are stuck with religion for now, at least religion can stop being a dick.
Number two, we got to let go of some of our traditions, right?
I don't know, man. I saw a tweet a while ago about how Catholic Latin Mass appeals to young people and gets them energized and excited about their faith. Are you sure millennials want to let go of the traditions? Because a lot of Catholics right now are convinced that the thing that young people really want is a service given entirely in a dead language that they don't understand.
The way that this generation receives the word of God and understands things very well may be different than what's going on in your church. Right? So they may receive from somebody who wears skinny jeans, right? They may receive from somebody who's up on stage rapping or doing spoken word. That's how this generation understands and receives truth.
When churches do stuff like that, it always comes off as super cringy. What I'm saying is, yeah, do those things, but make sure they get recorded for posterity.
My crew is big and it keeps getting bigger. That's because Jesus Christ is my...
No, God damn it, not like that!
Number three, focus more on social issues. And notice I didn't say focus only on social issues, but focus more on social issues.
Yeah, promote equal rights for everyone, including members of the LGBTQ community. I'm not sure how Alan squares this with the garbage he spews about LGBTQ people, unless when he says focuses on, what he really means is focus on fighting against. Ugh, I hope not. but that's probably what he means.
Number 4 is community. Many of the responses that I got in my post were the fact that many millennials just don't feel any sense of community when they go to church.
Community is actually pretty much the only value that a church adds to someone's life. Anytime you see an apologist hold up one of those studies that finds religious people live longer and are happier and healthier, there are almost always caveats in those studies about how it's not the religion that makes them happier or healthier, because then you'd expect the effect to only be present for the one true religion, but rather it's the community that has that effect. Because believers who don't attend church don't see the same benefit, and non-believers who are part of a strong community do see the same benefit, as well as the benefit being present regardless of the religion of the person attending regular services.
And so why not create community in your church that allows people to come?
So, orgy church? Sweet. Where do I sign up?
Number 5, and this is a huge one, start dealing with the tough questions. I cannot tell you how many people come to me on my channel and say, hey, Brother Allen, thank you so much for dealing with the questions that we have, because when we go to our church, we're just told to just accept it by faith, or we're just told, hey, you know what, I'm not sure of the answer to that, but you know what, just believe it's true, or whatever.
The idea that anyone is coming to Allen for life advice is legitimately concerning to me.
This generation is dealing with same-sex attraction. They're dealing with lust. They're dealing with having inappropriate websites on their phone.
And none of those things are inherently problematic, and preaching sermons against them is an excellent way to make sure millennials stay out of your church.
And then the last thing that I'll say is this issue of substance. This one surprised me, but many millennials said that they feel like the sermons are watered down. They feel like, one person said that it felt more like, what did they say? They said they felt it more like a rock concert and a stand-up comedy, right?
Personally, I don't think it's really possible to give a substantive message when your starting point is a book as immoral and irrelevant as the Bible. Well, that's enough of that. Thanks for watching. My media head will return next Monday, or the Monday after. Apparently, I'm not entirely regular with these. But if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Cirrus every Wednesday, 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the cringy Christian attempts to appeal to the youth that is my channel.
Virginity is cool. Come on. Virginity is cool. What up? Virginity is cool. He's got it. Virginity is cool.
If you'd like to be an equivalent of Steve Buscemi pretending to be a high schooler, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time!